The Napoleonic Wars. In our timeline, Europe faced decades of war through the Revolutionary Wars and later the Napoleonic campaigns. In this timeline, due to the consequences of several divergences piling up on top of each other, Napoleon's forces were now in South America, leading a campaign of reconquest for his renegade brother-in-law, Ferdinand VII. Following a native insurrection in Peru, causing them to swear fealty once again to the Spanish king, the anti-Napoleonic world was caught off guard, allowing for Napoleonic forces to quickly subjugate Argentina. With their southern flank mostly secured, Napoleon would move his forces northwards to conquer New Spain. New Spain had anticipated this and rapidly moved troops to New Granada, where they would resist Napoleon's invasion. However, they did not anticipate the treachery of the nobility. Promising to allow New Spain to keep slavery in their viceroyalty, despite Napoleon's previous anti-slavery stance, the nobility had executed a failed coup against the liberal-leaning republic, causing a civil war. Sensing weakness, America invaded and attempted to take New Orleans. However, Louis Philippe would defend the city, causing the American war effort to immediately be impeded by a Second Canadian Revolution and the secession of New England. With this supposedly quick conflict turning into a long struggle, Napoleon himself would depart for America to coordinate the offensive there. Would America survive this alternate American Civil War? Will Russia continue to abide by the Continental Blockade now that France has occupied North America? Will the British Empire survive the American chaos? How will Louis Philippe and Simon Bolivar play into the currently ongoing Civil War? All of these questions and more will be answered in Episode 6 of Project Bourbon, an alternate Napoleonic timeline. If you clicked into this video, welcome! You may have been spoiled several times over for the events of past episodes, but I recommend watching all previous episodes in order to fully enjoy this one. The playlist will be linked in the top right. At this point in time, the Republic of New Spain was under the leadership of Simon Bolivar. He was extremely popular in New Granada, so when elections had come to pass, he led the republic. Simon Bolivar's ideological stint towards liberalism and anti-slavery had panicked the nobility to act against the republic. Louis Philippe's popularity was a threat to Simon Bolivar's power and his ideals. Due to his distant relation to the old Bourbon Dynasty that dominated North and South America for decades, the potential of him claiming the throne would compromise everything he stood for. However, these circumstances were exceptional. One of the main reasons why there was so much support for a monarchical restoration in New Spain was due to the common folk's belief in Catholicism and the divine right of kings. With the repentance of Ferdinand VII and the legitimacy of his claim to the throne, many would support the Napoleonic invaders. However, if there was another claimant to the throne, the previously united monarchical front would be split between loyalty to two different claimants. And due to Louis Philippe's recent victory against the Americans and his self-professed adoration of liberal ideals, crowning Louis Philippe king may be the best measure that Simon Bolivar could take to ensure that the light of liberalism in Latin America doesn't get subjugated by the enlightened monarchs like Napoleon. Thus, amidst all the chaos, the Mexican Pope crowned Louis Philippe King of New Spain. This monarchical position was very limited in its powers, having less power than even the British monarch did in this point of history. But a new king being crowned had the effect that Simon Bolivar had been hoping for. The previously united Fernandic front against New Spain shattered, as they bickered regarding who was more legitimate. Notably, the natives who appreciated the Mexican papacy would put their whole support behind the Kingdom of New Spain. Eventually, the Fernandic elements of New Spain would be expelled from North America. With New Spain now much more stable than they were before, they were able to organize a resistance to the American and Napoleonic fronts. The Kingdom of New Spain had attempted to reclaim New Granada through an invasion. However, they did not anticipate the arrival of Napoleon himself to the front lines. With Napoleon's military genius, he's able to prevent the capitulation of the Fernandic soldiers in New Granada and entrenched his coalition in South America. However, Napoleon and his military prowess were needed elsewhere, so he embarked on a journey to the United States of America, where he hoped to stabilize their front lines and ensure the victory of his forces. After the failed attack on New Orleans, and the sudden springing of several anti-governmental revolutionaries, the American government had quickly become overextended, calling on Napoleon for his support against the insurgents. Due to New England's secession, the American government would suddenly lean heavily upon the institution of slavery. The Federalist anti-slavery propaganda would lead to the American government seeing any form of liberation of the slaves to be synonymous with treason. Regardless of whether the New England succession would succeed or fail, the United States of America was now entrenched with regressive ideals. This hatred of freedom had even gotten to the point where the president had offered Canada to Napoleon in exchange for his assistance quelling the northern insurrections, gaining a direct border with an ally, and eliminating the possibility of Catholic, French, anti-slave states manifesting after the Canada Purchase. It is because of this amazing offer that Napoleon abandoned the Columbian Front. This greed would mark the beginning of the end for the American campaign. Beaten but not defeated, the British Navy had performed several skirmishes with the navy that Napoleon had deployed to reach America, losing several troops in the process. While Napoleon would eventually land in the United States, his armies were significantly dwindled. Napoleon was quickly deployed to the most critical front of the American Civil War, New York. New York's strategic position at the mouth of the Hudson River led to the anti-Napoleonic coalition concentrating their efforts in seizing the city. Despite everything, Napoleon was still Napoleon, manifesting a victory and pushing back the New Englandic forces back to their core states. Napoleon would continue his march northwards. He had hoped that he would be able to quickly quell the New England secession and reconquer Quebec for France, but it was in that moment that Napoleon had received word that Russia had begun an invasion of Poland. Due to Russia's dissatisfaction with the partition of the Ottoman Empire and Napoleon's preoccupation in America, Russia would meet with Britain, Prussia, and Bavaria in order to coordinate another coalition to hopefully demolish French ambitions of conquering Europe once and for all. Russia and Prussia would settle their differences and coordinate a strike on Bohemia. This would allow for them to link up with Bavaria before sweeping through Germany and striking Napoleon's empire at its epicenter, Paris. This sudden attack was completely unexpected for Napoleon. Thus, he would begin a journey back to Europe in secret, abandoning the American campaign. Napoleon had known that if he were to be seen abandoning the American campaign, his brother-in-law, Ferdinand, would betray him. Napoleon was already aware of this possibility, so contingency measures were taken to ensure his loyalty. Napoleon had ordered the French troops stationed in Spain to detain Ferdinand, restrict his communications to the rest of the kingdom, and ensure that his daughter Isabel remains out of Spain and held captive in France. These measures had prevented Ferdinand from executing any sort of organized resistance. However, once news of Ferdinand's detainment had reached the Spanish populace, they began rebelling. The resistance of these patriotic Spaniards would be few and far between, as Napoleon had gained more popularity in Spain than in our timeline. With the turmoil in Spain, the viceroyalties had sworn fealty to Ferdinand had become significantly confused regarding who to swear their allegiance to. They would eventually put their faith in Napoleon, but the armies of the Spanish loyalists began to turn on their French comrades, throwing Napoleon's armies in America into extreme disarray. This allowed for the Kingdom of New Spain to reclaim Granada. Peru would not last, as their native insurrections gained traction and independence. The remaining Spanish majority Peru would swear fealty to Louis Philippe and join the Kingdom of New Spain. Argentina would be liberated by the Chileans, and soon the anti-Napoleonic forces would begin their ambitions to destroy Brazil, the main Napoleonic ally in the region. Napoleonic forces had entrenched themselves in Brazil, hoping to become a primary beachhead for Napoleon's return once the European theater had been resolved. Despite the constant attempts to inspire rebellion and the middling British Navy giving the Portuguese Navy trouble, they would hold on to Brazil, performing guerrilla warfare and luring the anti-Napoleonic coalitions into the deadly Amazon rainforest. Brazil would hold, for now. After the collapse of the Napoleonic forces in the United States of America, the capitulation was expected. However, the stubborn Americans would continue heavy resistance. America knew that Britain could not afford to deploy their navy to blockade American ports after their defeat at Trafalgar, and would begin floating around the idea of a white peace with the British. Britain had desperately sought to weaken American power, so they would garrison New England and agree to a ceasefire, leaving the Americans to fight the new Spanish on their own. The coalition had expected Napoleon's American campaign to crumble with the Russian betrayal. The Napoleonic allies in the region would hold on, putting their faith in the ever-victorious Napoleon. However, Napoleon would not be so sure. On his way back home from America, his heart was wary. The victory that he had nearly attained had been compromised by the greed of his traitorous former allies. These betrayals would anger Napoleon, but truthfully, he would be terrified for the future of his empire, and the fate of his legacy. Were his wife and child unharmed? Were there any factions seeking to revolt against him? Did his contingency plan against Ferdinand work? As Napoleon contemplated these questions, he would pass by St. Helena. This Napoleon may be concerned with the fate of his empire, but he would have never known that in our history, not too far from this point in time, he would be exiled to this island, never to return to Europe. While he slowly died of stomach cancer, he would ask himself, where did he go wrong? What actions could he have taken to prevent his fall? How could he have achieved his ambition of uniting Europe? Napoleon may have had an answer, but it was far too late. In this timeline, he still has plenty of advantages. Napoleon had not attempted to seize Moscow like he had in our timeline. He may have lost plenty of troops to the failed American campaign, but the troops he lost in America were mostly American conscripts. The troops he had tied down quelling the Peninsular War in our history would have a much easier time quelling the twice renegade king, due to far more support for his reign from the local Spanish, and he had plenty more conscripts at home waiting his command. He may be retreating from America and halting his ambitions there, but once he returned home, he still had a chance to put down the final coalition and proclaim himself Emperor of Europe. Would these advantages be enough for Napoleon to succeed where in our history he had failed? Will the Americas ever know peace? Will Napoleon ever manage an invasion of the British Isles? All of these questions and more will be answered in the final episode of Project Bourbon, where the War of the Sixth Coalition decides Europe's fate. That was episode 6, and the final episode is next time. I'm really excited for you guys to see it. Bourbon has been really fun to work on. Shout out to Louis Avant, Balan Ora University, and Enzo Rafael Souza Silva for being channel members. Thank you all so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. At the end of this video, I'll be doing a live stream of my multiplayer mega campaign, Project Millennium. We're looking for more people to join, so if you have Crusader Kings 3 and you're willing to install a mod, join the Discord server and we might be able to get you in a hot join. Anyway, make sure that you get some exercise, and stay safe, and I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe. Have a good day. Bye-bye.